What's up guys, Asian here with another build video, and today we're going over the Sorcerer Healer build. So between Hailstorm and Greymoor, not much has changed when it comes to how Sorc healers are kind of seen among the meta. In magicka DPS heavy groups, a Sorc healer is definitely a nice uh, bonus, just because of the additional minor prophecy there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be on a healer spec. Sorc DPS could work, or Sorc tank could work. So Sorc healers are kind of in this weird middle ground where they're a good addition to magicka DPS heavy groups, but they're also not the best or only way to put in the Sorc in those groups that need Sorcs. They're still very capable healers, though. They have one of the strongest burst AoE heals in the game. I should say first single target heal that can cover a wide area, so they're still pretty decent when it comes to healing. They also have that unique synergy conduit through liquid lightning, so they're still definitely very beneficial in even stamina groups, but Sorc healers do fall a little bit behind compared to Templars and Wardens, as they have been in the past, but they're in a much better spot than they have been since a couple of patches ago, so they're still very viable in all pieces of content. Just like the rest of our other build videos, we will not be going over any sort of gear. If you're interested in knowing what sort of gear I am running, I recommend checking out the healer gear video, which will be popping up in the upper right hand corner right about now. So if you're interested in knowing what gear you should be running as a healer, go ahead and check out that video and then come back here. This video is going to be talking about the skills and how Sorc healers play and how they differ from other classes. Let's go ahead and get started here first with our restoration staff bar. Obviously, we have Illustrious Healing. You can also run Healing Springs if you want the better sustain, but Illustrious Healing is going to give you, generally speaking, more healing done because it just lasts for a longer period of time, allowing you to take more time into dealing damage or maintaining other buffs. Combat Prayer is a stable for the Minor Berserk. Then we have Twilight Matriarch. So this covers a 360-degree area and heals 2 people, and it's a fairly strong burst heal as well. This does scale off of your spell damage and your max magicka, so right now we have a 12k heal, but this obviously will be bumped up if we are buffed with things like major sorcery, minor sorcery, and Warhorn buffs. So a very, very strong burst heal here. It also does a little bit of damage as well, so you're still contributing to damage by running Twilight Matriarch as well. Then we have Energy Orb, another staple for the heal, as well as the combustion synergy to help give resources back to your allies. Then we have a little bit of a flex spot here. We have Efficient Purge here for the cleansing, as well as 10% additional magicka regen from the Alliance War support passives, but you don't have to run Efficient Purge. I'll be going over some other abilities that you could have here rather than running Efficient Purge. Then our ultimate, another flex spot here. You don't necessarily have to run Reviving Barrier. I just have it slotted here for the 10% additional magicka regen, but you could run other ultimates as well, which we'll be covering in a few minutes. Next, for our back bar, this is the Lightning Staff bar. We have Liquid Lightning for the Conduit synergy. Do note that because it is an AoE damage over time, it will not count towards Zens. So if you are running Zens, not want to run, or you still want to run Liquid Lightning, but it won't count towards the additional damage taken debuff on Zens. Next, we have Dark Conversion. Don't necessarily have to run Dark Conversion, but the main reason we're running Dark Conversion is to proc Exploitation, which gives us Minor Prophecy. This lasts for 20 seconds. Dark Conversion lasts for 20 seconds, so it's just easier to maintain or keep track of it, especially for console users that don't have add-ons that keep track of buffs and debuffs, to just run Dark Conversion, because once Dark Conversion runs out, you know you have to recast it in order to get the Exploitation passive going again. You have to double bar Twilight Matriarch because it is a pet. That is one of the weaknesses of a Sorc healer. You do have to double bar a pet, so you only have 8 slots to work with. Then we have Blockade of Storms to help proc our enchant on the back bar. And then we have Power Surge, which is another way to heal your allies. This does proc off of critical heals, and it occurs once every 3 seconds. So while it is not a particularly strong heal, it's just another heal over time that you can basically layer on top of the rest of them, so that way you can focus more on dealing damage, particularly if you're a Zens or Martial Knowledge healer, or to maintain other buffs like Combat Prayer. And finally, we have Aggressive Warhorn for the Major Force buff. Now, in terms of other abilities you're going to want to have on hand here, first going into the Dark Magic line. Absorption Field is a pretty strong AoE ultimate healing ability. It heals for quite a bit, almost 3k per second on an ultimate. Plus, it also stuns anybody within the globe itself for the full 12-second duration. It doesn't stun elite enemies, but for dungeons, it can be very, very useful. Your tank just gathers everything up, you drop down the absorption field, and your DPS can pretty much stay within the absorption field relatively safely and just do damage on the stunned ad. So pretty strong ultimate when used appropriately. For the rest of the abilities under the Dark Magic line, you can realistically run any of them to help proc exploitation. The best one, in my opinion, is going to be either Dark Conversion or Daedric Mines, either Morph. Daedric Tomb is obviously going to be a little bit better here. Dark Conversion, like I mentioned, it just lasts for 20 seconds, so it's easy to keep an eye on Dark Conversion and just remember to re-up it once it runs out to re-proc the Minor Prophecy. Daedric Tomb does require you to be a little bit more mindful of when you need to cast it, but it does deal more damage, obviously, than Dark Conversion. So if you want to do some damage on the side, Daedric Tomb is a pretty good option to help proc that Minor Prophecy. Under the Daedric Summoning line, I do want to point out Empowered Ward does give out minor intellect, and it does also give you a damage shield. So if you want a damage shield and you're a sword healer, just run Empowered Ward. Don't bother running something like Harness Magicka or Dampen Magic. Empowered Ward pretty much gives you the exact same shield strength, but with the added bonus of provided by an intellect to everybody around you, which helps out Magicka sustain. So if you need to run a shield, run Empowered Ward rather than something like Harness Magicka or Dampen Magic. Under the Storm Calling line, not much really here to talk about. We already covered Liquid Lightning and Power Surge. Those are the only two abilities you really need from this line here. Under the Destruction Staff line, I don't have Elemental Drain on here, but you should be running Elemental Drain. It obviously depends, because only one healer will need to run Elemental Drain. Because we are fairly limited on bar space here, it might be better for the other healer to run Elemental Drain here, but it's still important to have this on hand in case you do need to run it. What I would do is I would basically put Elemental Drain somewhere here on the back bar, probably in place of Power Surge, and just move Power Surge up to the front bar and get rid of Efficient Purge that way. Under the Restless Staff line, there are two abilities I want to mention here. The first one is going to be Radiating Regeneration, which is very nice in dungeons. It covers 3 allies, and it's a pretty nice heal over time. So just another hot to kind of layer on top of things so that we can focus on dealing damage or maintaining other buffs. The other one's going to be Steadfast Ward. I recommend running the Healing Ward morph here, just for the additional heal over time that it provides. You're mainly going to be using this in conjunction with the Blackrose Prison Restoration Staff. This is not an ability that you will commonly use, but it is definitely one that you want to have on hand when those situations where you're going to be running the Blackrose Prison Restoration Staff rather than the Massive Restoration Staff. Next, I do want to point out a couple of single target dots that you're going to want to have on hand in case you are running Zens. Soul Trap, Consuming Trap is going to be the morph of choice just because it deals more damage compared to Soul Splitting Trap. Make sure to have that there as a single target dot. Under the Fighter's Guild line, Barbed Trap counts for Zens. It also uses stamina, so if you're the Zen's Martial Knowledge healer, this is a great way to help proc both, because it does take up your stamina to help keep your stamina low enough to proc Martial Knowledge, but it also counts as a single target dot for Zen. So Barbed Trap is pretty decent here as a healer here. Under the Mage's Guild line, both Entropy, both Morphs, and Scalding Rune count towards Zen. So you might want to pick up one or both of these in case you need another single target dot going for that. Make sure to have everything unlocked under the Undaunted line. Overflowing Altar for the Minor Lifesteal and the Blood Feast synergy. The Minor Lifesteal does proc any sort of proc that requires you to heal allies, so things like Symphony of Blades or Sentinel of Rkugamz. The Minor Lifesteal from Overflowing Altar will proc those sets. Shadow Soak for the Black Widow synergy. The synergy has been nerfed a few times, but still essentially free damage, so it's always nice to run it. There are going to be a few strategies where you will need to taunt things, so I do recommend picking up Inner Rage as your taunt. Then we have Bone Surge for the Spinal Surge synergy, which you're mainly going to be using for the Mage of Vitality buff. You're also going to be running it just for the synergy itself to help proc Alkosh and Lakestes, so it's definitely an ability to could run if you have the space for it. And obviously Energy Orb for the healing and the combustion synergy. Under the Alliance War line, we already talked about Efficient Purge and Reviving Barrier. The only other one is obviously Wrath of Warhorn, which you're definitely going to want to have because of that major force buff there. But beyond that, that pretty much covers it for all the skills that you're going to want to have as a sword healer. Again, as a Zen's Martial Knowledge healer, your bars are going to look very different because you're going to be focusing more on damage and maintaining your single target dots like Entropy, like Barb Trap, and keeping your stamina low. So if I was building for Zen's Martial Knowledge, I would probably say swap out Efficient Purge, obviously, for something like Soul Trap. So just put Soul Trap here, for example. On the back bar here, you can probably get rid of Power Surge and put down something like Entropy here. That covers 2 single target dots. Then you're obviously running a Poison enchant, so that's your 3rd dot there with the Poison dot from the glyph itself, and then you can probably swap out something like possibly your Twilight Matriarch, for example, and put another dot here or 2 dots here. The Matriarch is an ability that you can sacrifice. It is a very strong burst heal, but you have a lot of heal over time abilities already on hand. If things like Power Surge, for example, you have Illustrious healing, so you don't necessarily need to have the burst heal from Twilight Matriarch. It is a very nice emergency heal, but Comet Prayer is definitely more than enough, especially when it's buffed up and you manage to get crit heals done to act as a burst heal in place of Twilight Matriarch. So if you absolutely need the bar space as a Zen's Martial Knowledge healer, you can drop Twilight Matriarch. Just be aware that you're not going to have this emergency burst heal if you see a tank suddenly drop down to sub 10,000 health, for example. Just be very mindful of that. If you decide to drop Twilight Matriarch, you will need to rely more on making sure all of your HOTS are layered together appropriately because you won't have that emergency burst any longer. That pretty much covers it for your Sorc healer setup here. Now, in terms of how healers play, for those guys who are coming from other MMOs, healers are not just heal bots. Healers in ESO kind of fall more into a support role. Your job really is twofold. It is one, to heal people so they don't die, but it's also to help support the group DPS, to help them push as much damage as possible. A lot of the sets that we wear help contribute to that. Zen's and Martial Knowledge, for example, apply a damage taken debuff on the boss, so your DPS are able to deal more damage. Olorime applies Major Courage, which is a fairly important buff because it does buff weapon and spell damage, for example. Helping out Sustained also helps out your DPS because they don't have to do any heavy attacks, which are a DPS loss. So running things like Hollowfang, Hircine, or Worm is going to be beneficial for your DPS as well. Pretty much everything you do as a healer is going to be oriented towards helping to buff DPS. Even your healing abilities kind of help out with that as well. For example, Comet Prayer has a heal, obviously, but it also grants Minor Berserk, which is a very important damage done buff that DPS need in order to help push out more damage. Illustrious Healing is a heal over time, but if you pair it with the Master's Restoration Staff, you're also giving back some resources as well. So again, both of these abilities cover both your healing job as well as your DPS support job as well. Now, a Zen's Martial Knowledge healer is going to play very differently than your typical Olorime Hollowfang healer or Olorime Hircine healer, because the Zen's Martial Knowledge healer will need to pay more attention to the uptime of their dots. So for a Zen's Martial Knowledge healer, you're going to be playing a little bit more like this sort of hybrid healer DPS setup, so just be mindful of that if you are going to be running Zen's Martial Knowledge. With Zen's Martial Knowledge, again, you're going to be relying more on your heal over times to kind of heal people out besides instead of your burst heals. Now, in terms of how Sorc healers differ from other healers, one of the main weaknesses of Sorc healers is the fact that if you are on the Matriarch, you basically eat up 2 bar slots instead of 1. So rather than having 9 slots to play around with, you now have 8. When you start filling up those bar slots with essential abilities like Illustrious Healing, Comet Prayer, Energy Orb, you start running out of slots very, very quickly. As you saw here, we only really have 2 flex spots, which is a little bit on the low side when it comes to flex spots overall. It's a little bit more difficult for Sorc healers to play around with their slots if they're running the Matriarch. If you are not running the Matriarch, then it's obviously going to be pretty much just like any other healer in the game, where you have pretty much 10 bar slots to kind of work around. Now, Sorc healers do, generally speaking, deal a little bit more damage just because of Liquid Lightning is an essential part of their toolkit there for the Conduit synergy, which does do a little bit of additional damage. Plus, your Twilight Matriarch also deals passive damage while it's out, so you do have quite a bit of additional damage compared to some other healers, the exception probably being just DK healers with their Engulfing Flames, obviously. But generally speaking, sword healers do definitely focus in more on shock damage, so you will have a little bit more concussed uptime, which should help with off balance. But that's not really that big of a benefit because most groups will be able to maintain full uptime on off balance already, just with a shock damage enchant. So again, one of the main weaknesses of a sword healer is if you're running Twilight Matriarch, you do have to contend with fewer bar space, so less flex spots, but a strength is the Matriarch does end up providing some additional more passive DPS, plus the Matriarch is one of the strongest burst heals in the game and can cover a full 360-degree area as long as they're within that radius there. I personally don't play a sword healer. I highly recommend checking out a couple of other content creators that do play sword healers. For example, I know Style Anima has a few possibly older sword healer videos, but she has them compared to me where I don't really have any sword healing videos out there. So I do highly recommend trying to find other content creators like Style Anima, like Tabata, like Sophie, that do heal full time and they do have sword healer videos. The easiest way to learn how to do a support role besides just playing it is to watch other people play. So I highly recommend checking out their streams. I do have links in the description below to their YouTube and Twitch channels so you guys are able to check those out when you guys have a chance to do so. Well, that pretty much covers it for this video. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.